Welcome back to Reimagining Ourselves. Today's episode starts out a little heavy, and I want to make sure that you do not miss the warning that we are discussing abuse. If you want to skip ahead to the stigma part, I'll have the timestamp in the description. My name is Cassandra. I'm a licensed trauma therapist. I've worked with hundreds of trauma survivors at this point to good effect. I'm also someone who has lived through an impressively traumatic childhood, and today I want to talk to you about destigmatizing trauma survival. So first, in the spirit of trauma destigmatization, let me share a little about my background. My ACE score is a 10, okay? If you know, you know. I was born to two broke, underprepared, traumatized, and addicted children. Love you, Mom and Dad. Everything was very unstable. DCF was coming. I was being taken away from some bad situations and left in others for no rhyme or reason. I was being babysat by random people, and I have learned in my studies that there is a real and horrific phenomenon where, as a child, if you have already been the victim of predators, without intervention, you become more and more marked by your mannerisms, and other predators can clock you as a good target. So I think that is something that happened to me, and I went through quite a bit of sexual abuse throughout my childhood from multiple perpetrators both inside and outside my family. And of course, that's the thing, the trauma goes back many generations in my family. They have suffered in silence with horrific sexual abuse and incest, physical and emotional abuse, complete emotional neglect, cult involvement. My family is involved with the Branch Davidians, and I am related by marriage to someone who died in Waco. And I'm sure I'll find some wonderful opportunities to unpack all of this in some of our future episodes, so I'm just gonna leave it there for now. It's actually so hilarious when I start listing it out like this because it really just sounds like such a bag of horrors. And that's not how I see my life anymore, but there was a long time that I was stuck in that mindset. My point is, you can see that I know firsthand what it's like to live with trauma. And because of that, I understand when my clients say that they guard their trauma, they don't share, they keep quiet because they don't want others to see them differently. What is that perception that they are trying to avoid? Allow me to illustrate. I was once riding in the back seat with some middle-class acquaintances when they began to discuss a horrific case of child sexual assault that happened in our hometown. And one of them said, "That poor child. How could she grow up to be anything but a stripper?" And shaming of sex work aside, this sentiment really highlights what we are all afraid of. This perspective that after experiencing earth-shattering trauma, you are permanently damaged and your options are limited. This perspective is sometimes shared by people with very good intentions. Working in residential and psychiatric care, I saw compassionate coworkers who were trying to be mindful of the trauma that their resident had experienced drastically lower their expectations or excuse bad behavior. They felt like these people had been through so much and they just couldn't imagine. But this is one of my biggest pet peeves. Expectations are powerful, and if you treat someone like they are less capable, they might begin to believe it too. Being trauma-informed does not mean excusing behavior that is ultimately harmful to them. It means being compassionate about the reasons for their bad behavior. Like Marsha Linehan's idea of you are doing your best and you need to do better. Trauma-informed care includes helping people grow and reach for goals and reconstitute their self-image in positive ways. But having very low expectations for someone because of their trauma is insulting. It's so disempowering, and it seems to be based on a theoretical framework that says trauma causes permanent damage and limitation to human beings. I know that this is complicated because there are times where it is very kind to give someone a little grace about the reasons they might be acting a certain way. And there are real effects of trauma. I could give you a laundry list of things that trauma is associated with, although I won't, because if you're like me, you might find it a little discouraging. And I suspect that my own adult-onset type 1 diabetes is just one example of the myriad impacts of trauma, because high cortisol levels have been found to interfere with blood sugar regulation. But I feel like the public awareness around these impacts needs to be balanced with a compassionate expectation of healing and recovery. which every human is capable of. We are resilient creatures, and we always have the opportunity to use the stimuli around us to learn and grow. Because of this stigma of limitation, or at its most hurtful, the idea that a person can become damaged goods, many trauma survivors hide their experiences from the world. They have been hearing these same narratives over and over and want to avoid the typecast. We don't publicly acknowledge trauma unless someone is utterly debilitated because of it. And if that's where you are, I get it. I've been there before too. But when you're doing well, it's just hidden. This creates a vicious cycle in which there are disproportionately fewer positive representations of the life that's possible after trauma than negative ones. In my therapy practice, I frequently hear clients describe feeling pressured to defy the odds or overcome expectations. I would even go so far as to hypothesize that there is a subgroup of high-achieving and high-performing survivors of violence and violation. I have met so many trauma survivors who felt a need to prove themselves after their trauma, and this can cause harm to them as well, because people are on long and arduous career paths that they don't even enjoy because they are so desperate to outperform the stigma of their trauma. This almost happened to me. I started out my career looking to go into neuroscience and genetic labs before thankfully discovering a life that is so much more authentic to me. In reality, the image that they are trying to defy is just false. Trauma can be a catalyst for unprecedented spiritual growth. It does change you, but not only for the worse. Trauma survival often comes with increased empathy, creativity, and passion. I don't believe that things like child abuse, sexual assault, and violence are innate in us as human beings. I think it's like an illness that has spread, so I don't think we are meant to go through some of the things we do, but we are such fascinating and powerful creatures. We can really transform those experiences. With proper support and processing of your trauma, there's so much hope, and you can live such a beautiful life. I say this to you humbly, but I absolutely love my life. I have an unbelievable husband, an incredible son, wonderful and mischievous pets, as many houseplants as my heart desires, a garden where I can feel sunshine on my face, a job I absolutely love, working from home and helping people through their challenges, friends who are unbelievable supports and who I feel so comfortable being around, hobbies and interests and passions and a spiritual practice and wellness routines. I really could not ask for much more. While no life is perfect, I have a pretty great one, and I just want to share that as a hopeful example of life after trauma. My next episode is going to be all about the concept of post-traumatic growth. I'll explain more about exactly what that is with examples. If this topic interests you, and especially if you are carrying trauma yourself, make sure you stay tuned for that. It's a really profound way to free yourself from these expectations we've been talking about today. Thank you for listening, and I'll meet you here next time on Reimagining Ourselves.